Hey, this is Scott Smith, and this is the Greats podcast. This is a podcast that I'm starting. This is episode one. And what we're going to do here is I'm undertaking the goal of reading two, three, four biographies of a given Catholic figure, someone that's great, a founder, a leader, someone we can really derive great insights from, and then synthesizing it into like an hour long or so podcast. You might be familiar with the Founders podcast. This is kind of like that, but the Catholic version. So, one of the first greats I wanted to start with was Blessed Frederic Ozanam. That's Blessed Frederic Ozanam. So, if you're like me, you probably never heard of this guy. But if you're also like me, you've probably heard of St. Vincent de Paul, the Society of St. Vincent de Paul, like the charitable organization. So that wasn't actually started by St. Vincent de Paul. It was started by Blessed Frederic Ozanam. I'm actually a member of this Society of St. Vincent de Paul. We started a little conference where I'm from here in Louisiana, and this is one of thousands, tens of thousands of conferences across the United States and the world. This is an international Catholic charity organization. Um, Basically, what we do, we're contacted if people need help with food or utilities or about to be evicted from their homes. And then we go on a home visit to minister to the people, assess their needs, um, just be with them, even do like a financial analysis of their spending, of their budget to see how we can really help them. And our bigger conference in Baton Rouge is they have a pharmacy where people can get free prescription medications like for diabetes, things like that, where people can donate prescriptions that they maybe didn't finish, but are just instead of just throwing away medicine, people could actually use it. They have a giant food bank and food pantry. St. Vincent de Paul societies and conferences like this, they're everywhere in the world, and they are, apart from the Knights of Columbus and hospitals and orphanages, they are the church's largest, like directly charitable organization, like for horizontal outreach, not just for Catholics, but for anybody that has need. Just and that's from the beginning, both from St. Vincent de Paul and Blessed Frederic Ozanam. That's from the beginning. But so that's what the Society of St. Vincent de Paul is. But I want to talk to you. I want to share. I've been reading these biographies of Blessed Frederic Ozanam. So Ozanam, he came onto the scene right after his dad was in the original French Revolution. He's going to be there for the June Revolution of the 1830s and then the 1848 other big French Revolution. And so this is a time in France of terrible societal upheaval. The forces are arrayed against the church. This is anti-religion, communist, Freemasons. That's going to be who starts all these French revolutions and is trying to bring down Western civilization in France, the great daughter of the church, bring civilization down to dust, trying to destroy everything. And we still see a lot of this today. And what's interesting, I remember in school being taught that the French Revolution was this great story of heroism for liberty and fraternity and equality, but all that was just the veil of evil, of terrible things, trying to bring down the church, trying to destroy morality. And so this is the setting for Blessed Frederic Ozanam. He is going to fight back all these things, particularly on college campuses. And what's so striking to me is how what a focus the early St. Vincent de Paul Society and conferences had on catechism, on catechizing youth, catechizing like young men in college, which is such a Charlie Kirk thing. Like, the more I read this, the more I was like, good Lord, this is Blessed Frederic Ozanam created a playbook that Charlie Kirk, even anybody who goes on a college campus and tries to just teach truth, much less a Catholic truth, this was a playbook created by Ozanam. So let's get into this a little bit. Like St. Vincent de Paul, Ozanam was an apostle of truth, an apostle of charity. And there's some really great quotes in some of the books I've read about him to make this podcast about that. Everything is comprised in those words spoken in the crypt of the Carmelites. Apostle of truth, that is, of Catholic truth, which he always undertook to defend. And we're going to go through, he's got some very interesting family history, very interesting childhood, but he's really going to come of age in the universities of Lyon and Paris, and eventually become a professor at the Sorbonne, and a great intellectual in France when traditionalist intellectuals were not popular. He devoted himself to the defense of truth up to the last breath of his breaking body. Our life belongs to you, gentlemen. As for me, if I die, it will be in your service. That was his farewell. He's also an apostle of charity. At the age of 20, he's going to inaugurate with just a few of his buddies at the university. This is at the University of Paris, the first conference of St. Vincent de Paul, and he's going to say, let us go to the poor. Basically, his strategy for reconstituting not just France and Europe, but the whole world in the Catholic faith was an appeal through charity. That the purpose was always to evangelize, to bring back Europe from the brink of darkness through the kind of charity that only the Catholic Church can provide. That very authentic, Christ-like charity. And that's still to this day what the Society of St. Vincent de Paul is known for. It's interesting, though, they're not as known for the intellectual discourse, engagement, catechesis of young people. So he's this apostle of charity. From Paris, from Lyon, he extended the benefit to France, later to both hemispheres. I wish, he said, to enfold the whole world with a network of charity. That's exactly what's happened. Before closing his eyes forever in this world, he could count 2,000 such centers of charity, 2,000 cities in the world where these conferences of St. Vincent de Paul had already been established. He's going to die, I think it's 1853. He's going to die a pretty young man. And just in his young life, it's already going to spread everywhere, the Society of St. Vincent de Paul. I came to bring light into the world, he will write. What can I desire but that it should shine everywhere? Yeah, he died at just 40 years old. He had given everything to God by a solemn act. I come, Lord. And in his later years, and as his health was failing, he was dragging himself, stumbling from one station to another in his cavalry. One of the things that stands out about Ozanam's life is he had to fight despair and discouragement a lot, and not that it really affected him deeply, except for one real crisis of doubt when he was a young man. But he struggled with these things. Anyone establishing programs or foundations are going to do that, but it's the way he responded to defeat. He turned to God. A friend would describe it that in the darkest hour of trial, which had become for him actual physical pain, the young student appealed to the mercy of God for light and peace. He threw himself on his knees before the most blessed sacrament, and there, in tears and all humility, he promised our Lord that if he would deign to make the lamp of truth shine in his sight, he would consecrate his life to its defense. He arose consoled, like Paul on the road to Damascus. He was off to the races. That happened just before he went to college. That was his response to this crisis of doubt that he had. So a little bit on Ozanam's childhood. I thought it was really interesting the way his courageousness, his intellectual rigor, he didn't just lick that off the grass. He had some pretty amazing ancestors, and his mom and dad were pretty incredible. So after his dad, Jean and Antonin Francois Ozanam, he graduated from college in Lyon at the age of 20, graduated with honors, and he enlisted in the army of Napoleon Bonaparte and displayed his given awards for conspicuous gallantry. In particular, he was sent on diplomatic mission to this general, and he captured him, took him prisoner at Bologna, and presented him to Napoleon himself. Napoleon, I think this is Napoleon's first reign. So I'll try, one of the things in describing these historical figures is kind of give you the historical context as well. So I'll do my best to do that. But you have this weird interplay in French history between the end of the 1700s and the first half of the 1800s, where you've got revolution, chaos, then dictatorship, like by Napoleon or Louis XVIII and Charles X, then another revolution. It's just constant interplay between strong government and chaos. I mean, they're just constantly on the verge of the two. And Napoleon comes back multiple times from exile, and throughout this time, Napoleon never forgets the gallantry of Ozanam's father. One really cool story I thought about Ozanam's father. This is during the Reign of Terror. So this is right after the first French Revolution, 1789. So this is right after that first big French Revolution, the storming of the Bastille. And this is not the one that they write about in Les Miserables. That's a later one. It's kind of confusing. But right after that original French Revolution, you have this guy, Robespierre, take over. He's the chairman of the Committee of Public Safety. And this is a lot like one of those Dark Knight, when Bane takes over Gotham. They're basically just recreating what happens in Paris and France following the French Revolution. It's this crazy committee led by this crazy man that just goes on a reign of terror, killing people, sending everybody to the guillotine. Madame la Guillotine? Heads are rolling everywhere. Anybody who is, you see this in communism a lot. Anybody who's not believed to be pure in their belief in the Republic of France or the new Soviet dictatorship, their heads are going to roll under Hitler. So what happened with Ozanam's father? He was a devoted, fearless son, and he goes home to find out that his mother's husband. He visits his mother in Chalamont and finds her in a state of consternation. Her husband had been denounced to the government, arrested, imprisoned, and was likely headed to the scaffold or the guillotine to be hung or decapitated. And Jean-Antoine, Ozanam's father, jumps into his saddle, took with him 2 hussars, armed to the teeth, galloped to Berg, where, as he knew, the Committee of Public Safety was sitting, forced his way into the committee chamber, pistol in hand, demand order for release, and took it with him, went at full gallop back home to outdistance the gendarmes that were chasing him after the committee figured out what was going on. After the committee recovered from its stupefaction, and freed his mother's husband and returned to his regiment without anybody noticing he had even left. His absence wasn't even noted. So just the courage, the audacity to go before the most feared, loathed committee in France, there's flowing from which is a river of blood, and just go in there with a pistol, against all the might of the mob. And so you'll see that sort of thing in Ozanam's life. So you see some flexibility in his family. His father goes from being a soldier, and then the empire is established, and that's not his vision of France, so he leaves, goes to Milan, Milan in Italy, and becomes a doctor, and uh, doesn't just switch careers and become a regular doctor, which would still be impressive. He becomes a world-renowned medical doctor, writing scholarly articles on the science of medicine. A third of his patients were free. He's given free medical aid, and he often, and you'd think at this time in French history, a great scientist would be an atheist, but no, especially not in Ozanam's family. But he would pray at the bedside of his patients. That his uh, medical practice relied on God's own grace and help. You're going to see this when he continues to serve in 1813 during there's a typhus epidemic, and two of his medical colleagues have already died of typhus, but he continues to serve, remaining at the bedsides of hundreds of patients, just putting himself right in the crosshairs of this disease. And again, for this, even though he's in Milan, I think at this time Napoleon becomes king of Lombardy. And again, even though he fled from the empire, refused to serve the empire, Ozanam is again awarded gallantry, marks for gallantry by Napoleon. In that same year, Frederic Ozanam is born, 1813. Ozanam is going to be the fifth child of a family of 14, but as you'll see, very few of them survived. So Ozanam's mom, her family as well, will be fleeing the scaffold and fleeing the guillotine and the French Revolution. Any strong Catholics at that time are going to be fleeing France because they're hunted and they're trying to kill off all your solid, any religious people in France at that time. It was an offense punishable by capital punishment. So Ozanam's mother's family goes to Switzerland, between the two beautiful lakes, one near Lake Geneva, where an old uncle, a former prior of the Carthusians, helps protect them, give them a home. Marie, that's Ozanam's mom, could remember that it was there in a poor little church in which both Catholics and Protestants worshipped that she made her first Holy Communion. So Marie Ozanam is going to give birth to 14 children. 11 of these are going to die in their tender years. Not die at birth, but they're going to survive birth, and in like toddler, young child, that they're all going to die right then. I just can't, having many children myself, and I just can't imagine losing any of them, much less 11 out of 14. She had 14 children, only 3 survived to adulthood. She was a woman of hope and faith. Ozanam wrote of her that she did not indulge in idle tears like those who have no hope. Each death her streaming eyes were raised to heaven. He would later write on how many occasions have I seen my parents in tears when heaven had left them but 3 children out of 14. But how often, too, have not those 3 survivors in adversity and in trial counted on the assistance of those brothers and sisters whom they had among the angels? That's the beautiful part of this, is that they're looking, that they understand that even though their children have died, Ozanam's parents have succeeded in getting their children to heaven, and now in heaven their children can intercede for them and help those that remain. And Ozanam's mom is going to say, "Happy is the home that can count 1/2 of its members in heaven to help the rest along the narrow way which leads there." And Madame Ozanam, like her husband, is going to be serving. She's in this association of working women called the Watchers. She's kind of like her son, forming a group of women to minister by the bedside of the sick poor. So you're going to see Ozanam's parents, and even some of his ancestors, if we have time to get into that, gave him such a great example that they're setting him up for the great work that he's going to accomplish in his life, in addition to the strong foundation of the Catholic faith. So just briefly, some of Ozanam's other ancestors. One was a mathematician, a great uncle. So you see this thread of that beautiful thread of Catholicism where they're great scientists and great Catholics. They're men and women of great faith and great scientific learning. He was this great mathematician, like a savant, but he is preeminently a Christian savant. And he wrote, so let's see, what's his name? So 17th century, this was Jacques Ozanam. He took the chair of higher mathematics at the University of Paris, the Academy of Science. So pretty much the foremost French mathematician in the later half of the 1600s. He wrote that physical science shall be Christian as I teach it, and it shall lead to God. He was more Christian in his domestic than in his public life. He was simple in character and selfish, a father of 12 children who were as religious as he, a father that brought religion to his children. Inviolably attached to his religion, he boldly answered the Jansenists. So you'll see Frederic Ozanam boldly answering the heretics of his time, just as Jacques Ozanam answered the Jansenists of his time. Jacques Ozanam also fought the encyclopedists. It is for the doctors of the Sorbonne. It is for the doctors of the Sorbonne to debate, for the Pope to decide, and for mathematicians to go to heaven by the perpendicular. Love that. Jacques Ozanam talking about the path to heaven in mathematical terms. For the Pope to decide, and for mathematicians to go to heaven by the perpendicular. There's also a 7th century ancestor of Ozanam who sheltered Saint Didier when he was flying from the persecution of Queen Brunhild. But what's interesting there is that's apparently when Ozanam's family converted to Christianity, because he was a Jew that sheltered Saint Didier. Saint Didier himself converted that ancient Ozanam ancestor of the family, and Saint Didier also baptized him. In his childhood, this is interesting, he was a bit delicate, and through his life, Frederic he's going to have some real healthy periods, but for the most part, he's going to fight ill health. That just leads to his awesomeness, really. But at the age of 6, he almost died of typhoid fever. Remember, when he was born, his father was in the midst of a typhus epidemic. I think typhoid fever and typhus are different, but, pretty similar. His parents, as they were known to do, did not leave his bedside day or night for an entire fortnight, and everyone believed that he survived by miracle. And the miracle, because they're in the town of Vivarais, was attributed to St. Francis Regis, who that was his town. And it's interesting because St. Francis Regis, this is a Jesuit, I think it's a Jesuit. He was known for giving great sermons that were poetic but plain, and they attracted all classes. This is just like Ozanam's going to do when he's speaking to the mobs of France and the universities of France. But at the same time, Father Regis, Saint Regis, was made himself available to the poor, was a great servant of the poor. So it's this interplay of being a great evangelist and a great servant of the poor that you're going to see Ozanam be very much in the mold of St. Francis Regis. This is so one of the 3 surviving Ozanam children, besides Frederic, was Alphonse, who would go on to be a priest. So Frederick's brother was a priest, the Abbé Alphonse Ozanam, and he was also one of his biographers. He says Frederic was a quick-tempered child, headstrong, very sensitive and impressionable, but he is tender to little children, compassionate with every form of suffering, of an angelic purity which shrank from the most venial fault, an impossible subject for evil, an enthusiastic devotee of good. So there may, some of this might sound a little what's called hagiographic, like a little speaking more of a legend than, today's biographies, we like to give like a gritty tales of these great heroes that overcame a lot of filth and muck. But sometimes great heroes are just always great. So we see some of that in Ozanam's life and his childhood, but he does have this big crisis of doubt, and he writes about this, and it's from here that he never looks back. This is what Ozanam says. This is 1830. He's like, what is he? He's about 17, 18 years old. This is right before manhood. I must enter, he's writing a letter to his friend, and says, I must enter with some detail into a painful period in my life which began in rhetoric class and ended last year. After constantly listening to unbelievers and to expressions of unbelief, I commenced to ask myself why I believed. I began to entertain doubt, and I wished to believe. I rejected the promptings of doubt. I read books in which belief was established, yet none fully satisfied me. For a month or two, I believed this or that piece of reasoning. Some new difficulty presented itself, and then I doubted again. Oh, how I suffered, for I wished to be religious. My faith was not solidly grounded, yet I preferred faith without reason to doubt. All that tortured me. I took to philosophy. The theory of certitude quite upset me. I thought for a moment that I should doubt my very existence. Kind of that Rene Descartes, I think, therefore I am, another French philosopher. So just really painful crisis of faith for him, but he's going to persevere through it. And you can see this is a theme that we see throughout his life. I think it's important for us today. He's surrounded by unbelievers and blasphemers and irreligious people that scoff at the idea of religion. That is France of the early 1800s, and fortunately it's today for most every country in the world, and even for America. But this is how he responds, and that's why it's has great merit for us. He would later refer to how he got out of this crisis. Shaken by doubt, I grasped the columns of the temple with all my might, even were to crush me in its fall. Kind of like an image of Samson, just holding on to the columns of the pillars of faith. This is also might remind you of Don Bosco has this vision of a ship in the ocean, the ship being the church, buffeted by the winds, tossed about in the waves of time and the mobs of France, for example. But out from the ocean rises these two columns. Think they are, yeah. So the two columns in Bosco's dream represent devotion to the Blessed Mother and the Eucharist. Help of Christians, Mary, help of Christians, Eucharist, salvation of the faithful. And those two columns, despite all that the ocean can throw at the ship, secure the ship. And that's exactly the image that Ozanam as he's reaching out to these two columns. He'll then later say in life, today I find the same columns grounded on science, crowned with wisdom and glory and beauty. I find them again and embrace them with enthusiasm and love. I dwell near them. I shall point them out as beacons of deliverance for those who are drifting on the sea of life. That's a great summary of his whole life. He will throw himself on his knees before the most blessed sacrament, and there in tears and humility he will promise the Lord that if he would deign to make the lamp of truth shine in his sight, he would consecrate his life to its defense, to the defense of the church. And he is this great apologist. That's what he does. A note on, besides Ozanam's parents, he had some great mentors. One was Father Noirot, the Abbé Noirot. He was a priest philosopher, a professor, and Ozanam says his teaching rescued him. He taught at the College of Lyon and left this indelible mark on all the young men of the period that he taught. And you're going to see that Ozanam becomes a version of Father Noirot. Father Noirot, he didn't have a lot of writings that he left behind. He left behind his students, and his method was founded on Descartes rather than Socrates. The Socratic method, asking a lot of questions, but the Descartes method that Father Noirot used is that he would exaggerate doubt in order to pave the way in the mind for the return of true thinking. So he would exaggerate a statement of a thing, casting doubt on some element of truth to almost a ridiculous nature, so to make to to illuminate the argument for the truth. Which is a very interesting way of teaching. I think maybe just even that, just that little pearl right there, another way to teach besides the Socratic method and besides just dumping information on people. I think that's that pearl of wisdom is worth the price of admission right there with this book. And this book, so I'm reading. I think this one came from Frederic Ozanam and his correspondence. It's basically a Monsignor takes all his letters and synthesizes them into a narrative. It's beautiful. It's a wonderful book. Another thing that's interesting about Father Noirot and how he mentored youth as a teacher, which I think I do a lot with youth ministry, and so I look for these insights. But one thing he did a lot, he would walk with his students a lot, particularly like a one-on-one. So this is how it's described. Outside lecture hours, the master liked to have him, Ozanam, for a companion in his walks through the lonely and rocky paths which surround Lyon on all sides, and which make the city so dear to the minds of a melancholy and contemplative turn. It was usually on the south side of the city, in the straits of La Quarantine, that they walked, and thrashed out such questions as the reconciliation of science and faith, over which the Abbé Noir raised the illuminating torch of revelation. There too are to be perceived the first faint outlines of those large historical scenes of Christianity, of which Ozanam's mind began to conceive. Ozanam, his great work that he conceived for himself was basically a new history, a new historical investigation into all history to show the foundations of Christianity, and in so doing, through preaching and teaching and lecturing, reconstitute all civilization in Catholic terms. And there's some good quotes from him. So Ozanam, his convictions had been shaken by a little cheap philosophy of earth. They were now restored in the true science of heaven. That's a beautiful quote. You see people so often led astray by cheap philosophy because they'd never encountered philosophy, and so when they've never really been taught how to think, just to remember these things, but never really how to think, which is a problem with our method of teaching youth. And so when they really when their minds first awaken, they can be led astray by cheap philosophy, and they're not prepared adequately in education to use their minds to be able to think of the deeper things, the true science of heaven. Ozanam says that he felt the need in youth of some solid ground wherein I could take root and resist the torrent of doubt. One of the effects of Ozanam surviving this crisis of doubt is his faith is going to emerge stronger and happier than ever before, but he's also going to be more sympathetic with the failings of others. You'll see that in his charity, that the Society of Saint Vincent de Paul doesn't care who you are, where you're coming from. If you're in need, you're in need. You don't have to be, this perfect Catholic saint to receive aid from Saint Vincent de Paul. You can be an angry atheist, but you're treated just the same. How often, and Ozanam said it, sometimes he's even charged with excessive gentleness towards unbelievers. That's a beautiful statement for an apologist that converted so many people back to the faith, that he had excessive gentleness towards unbelievers. Ozanam said, when one has passed, as I have, through the crucible of doubt, it would indeed be cruelty and ingratitude to be harsh to those to whom God has not yet vouchsafed to give the priceless gift of faith. And thus God molded him and prepared him to be one day an enlightened and authoritative guide for the young men of his time. And there again, he's going to be like the Charlie Kirk of the angry young men of France. So the first great heresy that, besides all the others, this first specific heresy that Ozanam's going to be called on to confront just as soon as he turns 18, pretty much. He's going to write a polemic, I guess you would call it, against Saint-Simon. I think it's Henri Saint-Simon is Saint-Simonism. He's just a philosopher, Henri de Saint-Simon. You can tell who he is by, if you haven't heard of him, you can tell who he is by who he inspired, who he influenced. So that would include the utilitarian John Stuart Mill, the anarchist Pierre-Joseph Proudhon, and Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. He has a big influence on Marx. They would identify Saint-Simon as an inspiration for their ideas, and he would be classified as a utopian socialist, which is kind of an oxymoron. Also Thorstein Veblen, in terms of the School of Institutional Economics. Saint-Simonism was presented to the French mobs revolution, the mobs of the revolution, as the sublime revelation of future religion. The doctrine of Saint-Simonism expected and awaited its final enthronement. So this Saint-Simonism was presented to the mob as the sublime revelation of future religion. It was an improvement on religion. And it would come to its head in the July Revolution of 1830. That's where the mobs, I guess you'd count this as the second French Revolution. First one, 1789. Second one, July Revolution, 1830. And the third one, the revolutions of 1848. There were revolutions in 1848 in like all the major countries of Europe. It was a crazy time in Europe. This Saint-Simonism had taken over Paris, and at this time Ozanam was in Lyon, and the Parisian emissaries of this new philosophy came to Lyon in bizarre costume, promised the extravagance of idyllic reforms, awaken people and curiosity rather than sympathy with their fellow man. On the other hand, the prestige of their liberal theories of equality, the attraction of their promises of a moral emancipation, like we don't have to deal with these silly morals that the church is trying to foist on us. It was going to be the dawn of a golden age, returning to the primitive laws of humanity. It's basically hippies, right? This is for the free love and hippie movement, but this is just 1830s France instead of 1960s San Francisco and Haight-Ashbury and Woodstock. It was a most seductive influence, especially on the minds of educated young men, and they promised this new and better Christianity. It's surprising that someone at Ozanam's age at this time would have the wherewithal and hardiness to confront and attack with religion the false promises and seductive qualities of Saint-Simonism. So Ozanam responds to Saint-Simonism with kind of like it's a Jerry Maguire moment. Remember when he writes his manifesto on being an agent? Anyway, so Ozanam writes this letter. It's about 10 pages long, called by some surely the most astonishing letter that has ever been written by a 15-year-old servant. 15-year-old student, sorry. He's not 15 at this time, anyway, a young man. One notices when reading this the detachment of mind and heart from the tumult of current politics. That he writes of that life should be devoted to the service of eternal truth, as Ozanam is, and that he dedicates himself to a great work that's at once moral, social, and religious. in which he hoped for the cooperation of his friends. "My dear comrades," he wrote, "at the moment of greatest moral and material unrest, my decision is taken, my life's plan is mapped out, and as a friend I ought to acquaint you with it. In the first place, tired of politics, wearied with systems of all kinds, watching the charade being played all around me and patiently waiting until the key word be uttered, I have resolved to confine myself to my own sphere, to work out my own development, apart and detached from society. My good friends, let us then be stirring while the storm is overthrowing many of those in high places. Let us develop in obscurity and in silence, to be full men when the period of transition shall have passed and we shall be needed." His scheme was, as I said before, his scheme was to rebuild society on a religious basis. He's, somewhere 17, 18, just becoming a man, lays out, has a great vision for his whole life, and he maps it all out, and he does it. He's only going to live, he's right in the middle of his life. He's going to live another 20 years. And in that short amount of time, he's going to develop an organization, teaches people the glories of Catholicism, while also providing real help to the poor. And it's going to sweep the whole world. It's amazing that he would have the insight to do this. And you see this among the great founders, that they have this grand image for their whole lives, and then they do it. And nothing stops them. Or everything stops them, but they overcome it. Ozanam, he offers some apology for the grandiose character of his vocation as he's writing in this letter, this manifesto, this Jerry Maguire moment. "I am amazed at my own daring, but what can one do? When an idea has taken possession of one for the last 2 years and grows until it occupies the whole mind, how can one set limits to it? When a voice cries and cries and ever cries, 'Do this, I wish it,' how can silence be imposed on it?" So he is saying here that his mind had been thudding for the last couple of years following his crisis of doubt. The Holy Spirit had been inspiring him and pestering him and gnawing at him constantly about this great work that maps out his whole life. Coffee break. So some of what he's going to begin with is he's going to begin offering oratory and a debating society among young men in colleges, but he's also going to go back to just basic, beautiful Catholic devotions like Eucharistic processions. He writes to his mother, "You know, my dear mother, that in Paris, as in Lyon, religious processions are forbidden. But because it pleases some disturbers of the peace to confine Catholicity to its temples in large cities, that does not appear to virile young Christians to be a good and sufficient reason why they should be deprived of a most impressive religious ceremony." People always doubt the effectiveness of the ancient beauty of Catholicism. Eucharistic processions. Like, people think youth want light shows and loud music and smoke machines, but we have thuribles. We have our own smoke machines. Eucharistic processions will always stir the heart of the youth because of their beauty. So he writes of reconstituting Christendom, and this is something that we should be thinking about today, because there's a great book that Monsignor Shea put together. It's called "From Christendom to Apostolic Mission." The basic idea is that Christendom has fallen. The institutions of America, of the world, are no longer just basically Christian. Anything that is being destroyed, and we have to rebuild it. We're back. We've gone from Christendom backwards to the apostolic age, the age of St. Paul and the apostles. Ozanam writes, "It is indeed a memorable spectacle to see amid so much unbelief and such general defection that the chosen band of those virtuous minds does not decrease, that it recruits and perpetuates itself, preserving the moral treasure in all its purity, that youth actually will seek to preserve morality as a treasure, not just break it down and like Saint Simonism. And Saint Simon, that's just his last name. He's not an actual saint. It's not Saint Simon. Like Saint Simon Stock, who gave us the scapular. Ozanam, continuing that quote, the moral treasure in all its purity, whatever may be the form under which the Christian religious spirit is to be reconstituted, as we hope it may be, in society, this progressive virtue of young hearts, this faith and modesty held in reserve and in seclusion, will push forward powerfully the time of its development. And Ozanam begins to lead, when he goes from Lyon to Paris, the young men of France towards rediscovering virtue, morality, and Catholic beauty. Some of these descriptions of what we're facing, the college students, the young men and women of Ozanam's time, I think really should sound familiar. This one man's religion scarcely went farther than a spiritualism which respected religious belief. It was at most a free and easy Christianity. His habits, as well as his inclinations, kept him in the world of the Parisian salon, the salons, where Madame Recamier was queen and Chateaubriand king. Daily communication, above all, daily contact with such a charming Parisian constituted a dangerous quicksand for the minds of unsuspecting young men. A dangerous quicksand for an open-hearted young man who was easily influenced by everything that characterized genius and glory. Right, the aura of genius and glory, but not the truth of it. Ozanam's refined tact and sense of moral delicacy enabled him to avoid this danger. This is we're describing one of Ozanam's early friends. So this atheistic society of Paris, France in the 1800s, of America now and everywhere, we are grieved to find, this is Ozanam, we are grieved to find it hostile to every ideal and every sentiment that is dear to us. The more closely we come into contact with men, the more we discover pride and selfishness, pride among savants, folly among people of the world, intemperance among the masses. When one has been reared in a pious family, such a sight fills the heart with disgust and indignation, and one is tempted to protest and condemn. But the gospel forbids that. It places before us the duty of devoting ourselves entirely to the service of that same society that repels and despises us. That's the greatness of Ozanam, is being frustrated and disgusted by all this, but responding not in anger, as the mobs did, but in gospel, charity, and love. That's not easy. So Ozanam finds himself thrown into university, the École des Droits. He records the bitterness of his disappointment and the people he finds there. He finds himself thrown among young men utterly destitute of religion and utter indifference to religious observances. He finds that only he alone observed the Friday abstinence from meat. He was ridiculed and laughed at for his strictness, but he is not to be moved from his principles by such poor examples of those around him. He isolated himself and sought recreation in his books. So he spiritually goes into a cave and becomes almost like a monastic, a monk amidst all this irreligion. In attending his lectures at the Sorbonne, he made the acquaintance of a few young men, Catholics like himself. The very differences which divided them from their fellow students banded them the more firmly together, and formed the nucleus of a body which was destined in future years to leaven the infidelity of France. So a few social outcasts ridiculed because they stay true to their faith and are devout. This creates the antidote to the impiety of France. At this time, the professors of the Sorbonne were, without exception, Voltairean. This is Voltaire. So what that means to be Voltairean, Voltaire was an Enlightenment figure. He was a deist, believing just a watchmaker God, which would basically lead to atheism in the next generation. Advocated freedom of religion, but really meaning freedom from religion, separation of church and state. Great impact on the leaders of the world leaders of his time. But at this time, all his devotees were basically atheists and anti-religion. So at this time, the professors of all the Sorbonne were Voltairian, who lost no opportunity of casting ridicule upon the doctrines of Christianity. Voltaire, Candide, he kind of used crude sexual stories to ridicule priests and the church. That was kind of his claim to fame. So the Ozanam's professors endeavored to oppose Christian doctrine using the latest discoveries, scientific discoveries. One professor, Geoffroy, held the chair of philosophy in 1832 when Ozanam was there, had striven in his lectures to prove the impossibility of revelation. Ozanam was indignant at the unsoundness and the one-sidedness of the arguments proposed by the chair of philosophy at the Sorbonne. So he drew up a protest. Again, he goes, writes out his thoughts. He gives them to his professor, and the professor promises to reply to it. After the lapse of a fortnight, the professor lightly alluded in his lectures to Ozanam's protest and dismissed Ozanam's objections with just a few contemptuous remarks. So what does Ozanam do? Does he get angry? Does he get sullen and bitter? No. He doubles down. He summons all the Catholics of the school, draws up a formal protest, reads it publicly. The professor then apologizes for saying he held and says he holds Catholicism in the highest veneration. So the professor, he basically capitulates, realizing he has no arguments, that his few contemptuous remarks don't really count as an argument. But he did it. What did Ozanam do? He confronted directly, respectfully, and brought together a coalition. He built allies, built bridges. He built, again, this nucleus of young men to defend truth and beauty. So he begins with this. This is the spark of a debating society. Those friends, whenever you undertake to do something great for God, you will find allies. And that's what happens. Numbers of Catholic young men rallied around this little band, and they start having evening meetings. They discuss subjects of common interest. It grows into a debating society. A large hall is given to them by a generous friend and benefactor. Students of all shades of religious belief were invited to attend and join in the debates. So in all it wasn't just Catholic debating society. All religions were invited. That's a constant hallmark of Ozanam's. You're going to see that as a constant hallmark in Ozanam's approach to solving problems, to invite all and let the beauty and truth of the church to shine, to release it like a roaring lion, release the truth. And Ozanam becomes the recognized leader of this debating society, particularly the Catholic party of it. He distinguishes himself early on with just a persuasive, simple eloquence, and this is going to serve him well. This is really where he's going to be trained to become a great professor later on in life as a great professor of the Sorbonne. He's going to get to the Sorbonne, directly face its intellectual giants who are really intellectual mice, and then become a true intellectual giant of the Sorbonne. So just a beautiful story. So they have their first meeting of I don't think it's yet called the Society of St. Vincent de Paul. It's held in May 1833 and is presided over by this benefactor they have. He's he's a Catholic businessman, and he just likes to help these young Catholic college students. He gives them a place to meet. And he says, if you are in earnest, this is Monsieur Bailly, about serving the poor as well as yourselves, you must not let it be a mere doling out of alms. Bringing each your pittance of money or food, you must make it a medium of moral assistance. You must give them the alms of good advice. So this is going to be wisdom that's going to be incorporated into the genetic code of Society of St. Vincent de Paul, that assistance that helps not just the belly but the soul. They truly become brothers to the poor whom they visit, and they are welcomed not for the relief which they bring, but far more for their fraternal words of kindness, consolation, and advice. From this, the society is going to grow. Ozanam is going to reach out to the Archbishop of Paris to appoint a priest to engage in public discourse. At first, the Archbishop liking Ozanam's idea, but not the means to accomplish it, he's going to appoint a few older clergy members and just a panel to not really engage, but just to invite people to come and listen to him, and not to go out and publicly debate the communistic and anti-Catholic forces, and that's not going to work. And eventually, the Archbishop will adopt Ozanam's idea and appoint a really good priest at that time. His name, the Abbé Lacordaire. Father Lacordaire. At this time, see if this sounds familiar, the church in Paris was a feminine church. The churches were but thinly attended, and that chiefly by women and children. Only very few old men were to be found who had the courage to face the public ridicule, which was directed against those who were weak enough to believe and courageous enough to show outward tokens of their faith. To be a Catholic in those days was looked upon in Paris as a mark of feebleness of intellect. And Ozanam, with his society and with the Abbé Lacordaire, are going to change that. So fast forward a little bit, Ozanam's going to leave Paris and then return, and he's going to find that the society which he started has already grown and flourished marvelously during his absence. 600 members, from just a few of them to a few dozens to 600 assembled in an amphitheater in which their meetings were held. They welcomed him. The majority were composed of poor students, but set off, as it were, by a few persons of the very highest social position. At these meetings of poor college students, you rub elbows also with peers of France, counselors of state, generals, and distinguished writers. And he goes on to list all these enrolled in this peaceful crusade of charity. And from here, basically, it's just going to spread throughout the world. It's going to go into England, and this is how the Society of St. Vincent de Paul is going to proceed. It's going to begin in the colleges. It's going to speak to young men, give them forceful debates of the counter-argument, everything they've been hearing. It's going to catechize boys as well, teach boys, give them better religious instruction. And doing all this, allow them to go out, meet with the poor, sit with the poor, minister to the poor, give the poor aid. And it just grows. It just grows and incorporates people from all segments of society. It's just this beautiful Catholic force across Europe. I think a lot could be said about the growth of it. There's different themes that it's always, to be a member of the Society of St. Vincent de Paul, you need to be a practicing Catholic, but to receive aid from the Society of St. Vincent de Paul, you can be anything or nothing. So we've kind of gone over the French revolutions of 1789, 1830, when he's just beginning school. Now St. Vincent de Paul Society is going to grow, and we're going to see it again in the Revolution of 1848. And here, Ozanam is going to encourage the Archbishop of Paris, who by this time is this venerable older man, revered by both sides, revered by all. And he's going to encourage him to, in a very Les Miserables kind of moment, mount the barricades and to make a call for peace. And so there's some very beautiful language in all the biographies talking about this. Also, in this time, not only is the Society of St. Vincent de Paul growing, but Ozanam is becoming a very well-respected professor at the Sorbonne. He's supporting other professors that he's converting to Catholicism. And there's a moment where he jumps on the stage and defends one of the professors that converted, who's become a subject of scorn. And he's just he's really a heroic figure that just can blow down houses with the power of forcefulness of his eloquence. And it's not by lung power, just by simple truth and eloquence. And young men fly to it, old men hear it for its beauty. It's kind of like, what if Charlie Kirk had been allowed to live a little bit longer? You can kind of see in Ozanam what he could have become, but even I think Ozanam is what he had to fight and overcome was perhaps even worse than what we see today. The violence of the Parisian mobs, we haven't seen anything like that in America. But I think it's good for Ozanam to be our mentor and our light, because we could well see it again. So the Archbishop of Paris is Archbishop Affray, who is not afraid. Just like his father before him, Ozanam, and when the Revolution of 1848 breaks out, he enlists. He's not in great health, but he enlists, and it's a poignant moment. He says his conscience was easy, and he would not have recoiled from any danger in enlisting, but he is free. I am free to admit that it is a terrible moment when a man bids what he believes to be his last farewell to his wife and child. So he didn't do it without the acknowledgement of responsibility. So Ozanam, it's another mark of how he moves, how when he acts, it's coming from prayer. So you see he's moved by the Holy Spirit, and when he acts, other people join him because they are also moved in the same way. So when Ozanam goes to the Archbishop Affray, he finds that the Archbishop of Paris has the same idea as Ozanam has, that he should make a public speech on the barricades to end the violence and the bloodshed. His Grace Archbishop receives them as graciously as usual, and after having heard their project, said with perfect simplicity, I have been obsessed with that same idea since yesterday. Ozanam and the Archbishop have had the same idea. The Archbishop says, but how can I bring it about? Where can I reach the insurgents? Would General Cavaignac permit such a step to be taken? Where can he be found? Ozanam answers all these objections, assuring him that he would be received on all sides with veneration. And the Archbishop says, you are right. Very well, then, I shall go. I shall put on my cassock so as not to attract attention, and you will point out the way for me. His attendants insisted that the Archbishop put on his purple soutane and wear his pectoral cross. I shall do as you wish, he said with the same simplicity. This reminds me of King Theoden at the last charge of the Rohirrim and the Battle of Helm's Deep. Hope is failing, and he puts on his armor, just as the Archbishop puts on his pectoral cross and mounts his horse, grabs his sword, and rides out. The Archbishop, it's almost like a Eucharistic procession. He proceeds to the streets of Paris. All cars stop to let him pass. They say it would be impossible to do justice to the veneration and enthusiasm with which his grace was received. It was a triumphant march from the Ile St. Louis to the National Assembly. The troops, the National Guard, the movable columns stood to arms and gave a general salute. Men raised their hats, and women and children bowed. It was a most impressive sight. General, when the Archbishop meets General Cavaignac, he receives him with respect and admiration. The general appreciated heroism, if not Christianity. The generals beg the Archbishop not to expose himself to his danger, but his grace's resolution is unshakable, and he says simply to the generals, I shall go. He had drawn up a few hours before a simple proclamation that he would read, calling on workmen to lay down arms and promising a full indemnity. The Archbishop, after speaking to the general, returns to his house, eats his last meal, and makes his confession as if he were going to the gallows himself. And then he makes his last march to the barricades. They describe it as this great sight, the Archbishop wending his way to the Bastille, the guards presenting their arms to be blessed, officers begging him not to go because everybody assumes it'll be to his death. Some assume he's just going to the ambulances, and women bring him linen, thinking that he's just going to help the wounded. When they realize what he's going, he says, my life is a little thing. He'll say, the good shepherd, the Archbishop says, the good shepherd giveth his life for his flock. His countenance seemed illuminated. And about 8 o'clock in the evening, he arrives at the Bastille. He calls on a colonel to call the ceasefire. And the Archbishop says, I shall go forward alone to those unfortunate men who have been misled. The soldiers' fire is ceased. A young member of the Society of St. Vincent de Paul named Brechemin goes in advance and waves the white handkerchief, ties it to the branch of a tree, so in advance of the Archbishop climbing the barricade. The Archbishop then reads from the promise of pardon which he held in his hand, and many at the barricades were already beginning to move their hearts to reconciliation. And then a single shot goes off. A frightful discharge follows that. The Archbishop falls mortally wounded into a workman's arms, saying, friend, I am wounded. And when he dies early the next day, his last words are, may my blood be the last to be shed. It takes a little while for the news of this to spread throughout the city, but the whole of Paris is in grief and horror at the death of the Archbishop. And this, along with everything else, leads to the growth of, if not peace in France, though this is the pretty much the end of the hostilities and revolution in France. And that's 1848. In the next 5 years, we're going to see a period of rapid growth in the Society of St. Vincent de Paul, but Ozanam's health is not going to be good in these last 5 years of his life until 1853, 1854, and it's going to be hard for him because he's been working towards this all his life, and then he's 35 years old, right when he could have such impact with meeting people and reaching new people and growing the society. He can't. He's often bedbound. A time of great warmth, domestic warmth, because he's able to enjoy his children and his wife as he travels around Europe, often to places of healing, whether it's supernatural or natural, like healing baths in the sea. One place, Biarritz. It's right at the corner of the Bay of Biscay of France and Basque Spain, right in that corner. Just a beautiful place. Just beautiful places he gets to tour in his last days. What is it? Stella showed you? Oh, how did Stella know? But how did she wasn't there when it happened? Okay. Let me finish this because I need to get ready. I need to take my shower and leave by 3. It's 2:26. But just to get in the parking lot? That's what you're supposed to. Okay, so these last few years of Ozanam's life, he's still a successful lecturer at the Sorbonne, but he's fading, he's declining. So these final years of Blessed Ozanam's life, he's fading, he's declining, but there's great growth in the society, and he's able to help with that to some extent, but not to the full extent that he'd like to. And even still, he's not doing nothing. He's basically walking uh, his last stops on his road to Calvary. He's still going around establishing new societies throughout Europe. Um, he'll say after establishing one new conference, "What matter," he said, "material assistance is only a secondary object of the society. Sanctification of souls is the principal aim. We shall work for that." A nourishing confraternity of the Blessed Virgin Mary was established for young girls in this conference he just established. The brothers, for their part, carried out a lay apostolate among the parishioners, whom they were bringing back to faith through catechism. So and that's what I. If anybody's listening, it's a member of the Society of St. Vincent de Paul, to recognize that that was the original purpose of St. Vincent de Paul's of the society, to first of all bring people to the faith, secondarily to provide material assistance to the poor. That's the goal. Whether they're doing that directly or just providing, because you don't see that as much anymore. The Society of St. Vincent de Paul establishing sodalities and apostolates and confraternities for devotion. So we have to be careful that to follow the founder, to not let it become like a socialist operation of just giving money to the poor, but to serve them, to be one with them, but to always an effort to bring them to the faith. Such a fruitful time of growth for his life's mission, yet his body is failing him. This is a poignant time in the life of so many great founders of orders or even companies, that this is the most fruitful time. Everything is more or less easy now. The obstacles are fleeing before their face, but their own bodies are failing. Ozanam will say, "One of my greatest griefs is that, having studied deeply, I believe I have some ideas without the strength to reproduce them." He enjoys the scene of Biarritz. I don't know how to say this. It's one of the most beautiful places in the world. Victor Hugo, who visited this place in 1843, describes as, "I've not met in the world any place more pleasant and perfect than Biarritz. I've never seen the old Neptune throwing joy and glory with such a force in the old Sibylle. All this coast is full of humming. Gascony sea grinds, scratches, and stretches on the reefs, its never-ending whisper. Friendly population and white cheerful houses, large dunes, fine sand, great caves, and proud sea. Biarritz is amazing." Oh, so this beautiful place he is. Ozanam enjoys this amazing beauty, but not without remorse, condemned as he is to spend many months in idleness at a time when not a single day was to be lost. One of his last great works on behalf of his society is meeting the Grand Duchess of Florence. He was not feeling good at all, extremely ill health, but somehow he gets himself to visit the Grand Duchess, and this is what it. This is how it's described. A woman of good faith and generous heart received him with kindness and distinction, but she has great worries about the Society of St. Vincent de Paul. And this kind of tells you both the obstacles and the essence of what the society had become. The Duke of Florence regarded the society as a species of political secret society, which he could. And this is a time of a lot of distrust in Europe, and so the Duke of Florence could only authorize the Saint Vincent de Paul to operate within Florence if certain members, whom the Duchess named, ceased to belong to the society. And Ozanam, in his way, explains politely the origin and the spirit of the society, how politics are expressly excluded by the rule of the society, and the necessity of welcoming without exception everyone who desired membership on the condition that he was an honorable man and a practicing Catholic, honorable man or woman. He spoke warmly, animated rather than depressed by his feverish condition. And the Grand Duchess heard him. She didn't really make a response, but shortly thereafter, the Society of St. Vincent de Paul was officially authorized to do its works, found to be founded in Florence. So, to wrap up this life of Ozanam, I have for you his last words to his society and his last words, as well as the dream of the young man, the prophecy of a young man that was fulfilled. So his last words to the society says, "Far from finding, my dear brothers, matter for pride in such expansion, we shall seek to develop the spirit of humility." All right, this has become an international association, institutions spreading throughout the world, crossing the oceans, and this should be a source of humility, he says. Grass grows rapidly, but it does not cease on that account to be insignificant. It does not say because it covers much ground, I am the oak. We too, while we become numerous, remain insignificant and feeble. We do not dream of comparing ourselves to institutions which God has reared up in the church, like mighty trees of the forest to give shade and fruit. Let us be humble. I notice regularly that in Italy as in France our conferences succeed in the end of overcoming prejudices and difficulties. Now everybody's prejudiced against a new society. That's one thing Ozanam writes about, like when the society sends out its emissaries from Paris, like the heresy of Saint-Simon once did. People distrust it because it comes from Paris and bad stuff comes from Paris. But how can people be distrustful of the Society of St. Vincent de Paul if it's humble? And that's what Ozanam urges his people. But what ill can anyone wish a few obscure men who do not propose to do more than carry bread and consolation into a few garrets? May God preserve the simplicity which characterized our first efforts, and by that sign St. Vincent de Paul will acknowledge us for his disciples. Farewell, my dear brothers. I commend myself to your prayers, of which I stand in need. Those were his last words to the society he founded. His wife wrote of one of his last days, their last conversation. He was lying, he was sitting on a terrace overlooking the sun setting over the waters, and his wife, admiring the serene tranquility of the moment, and which reigned over the features of her husband, who was at that point an invalid. Ozanam had become an invalid. She asked him which of God's gifts he set greatest store on, and he answered without hesitation, peace of heart. Without it, no good can make us happy. With it, every trial, even the approach of death, can be borne. What a beautiful sentiment as he is preparing for his own death. Which of God's gifts is the greatest? Peace of heart. So he will die on September 8th, 1853, I believe, on the feast of the Nativity of the Blessed Virgin. His breathing will become labored and irregular, and eventually I think he suffocates to death. He, at the last, opens his eyes, raises his arms, and cries aloud with a strong voice, my God, have mercy on me." Those are his last words. So we turn back to the original plan that Ozanam had after surviving his crisis of doubt in 1831. He wrote January 15th, 1831. I shall be glad if a few friends stand by me. We shall unite our efforts and found a society. Others will join us. It may happen that some day society will come together under its protection. Then, full of youth and strength, Catholicity will burst upon the world, and directing the rising generation will lead it on to true civilization and happiness. That, as a young man, that was his prophecy for. He just had a couple people beside him at that time, maybe not even that. He was a social outcast, and he built upon that a dream of a band of brothers that would grow, and he says, others will join us. Oh, yeah. Hundreds and thousands of people ultimately will join him in his life and in the years since then, the 150, 175 years since then. There are not just hundreds of thousands of people in the Society of St. Vincent de Paul, but hundreds, thousands of conferences worldwide, each with plenty of devoted people. Just truly amazing work that this man undertook in his life, and saw that, early on, what could happen. Society someday will come together under its protection, then full of youth and strength. Catholicity, that old church, right, that old mocked church, will burst upon the world and direct the rising generation, will lead it to true civilization and happiness. Found in the midst of all this anarchy of France and revolutions and moral depravity and chaos, will again be the delivery mechanism for Western civilization to rise again. What a beautiful story, this life of Frederic Ozanam. I hope you've enjoyed bringing together, me trying to bring together all these biographies of this individual. A lot of them not even in print anymore, but all really, the biographies were really good. The three biographies, really four, even 3.5, were Frederic Ozanam and the Establishment of the Society of St. Vincent de Paul by Archibald Joseph Dunn, The Life and Works of Frederic Ozanam by Kathleen O'Mara, and then my favorite was Ozanam and His Correspondence by Monsignor Bonar. Those books were all written in late 1800s, early 1900s. Hope you've enjoyed this. There's much more to come. One of the next ones I think you'll really enjoy, and it's about Jan Tyranowski, St. John Paul II's youth minister. A lot of these books I'm going to be working from are out of print, and the ones for Jan Tyranowski, I can't even get them to America without some really awesome Polish friends helping me out. So some of these stories you won't be able to hear anywhere else, or at least not in English. So I hope you'll enjoy this, and thanks for your time. Please pray for the success of the Society of St. Vincent de Paul. Please ask for the intercession of Blessed Frederic Ozanam and his eventual canonization. And please pray for the success of this podcast, that it would provide religious mentors to all of us to do great things in the mold of these great Catholic figures of history. Thank you.